Good evening and welcome to Behind Headlines. And this programme tonight we shall be discussing the news that the British government may follow in the footsteps of the French President Macron in recognising a unilateral Palestinian state, as the French President has convened a UN conference in June to discuss voting for a Palestinian state, and we'll be asking what is the biblical perspective on a Palestinian state. In this programme today I'm joined by my good friend and co-host Robin Benson. Robin, great to see you on Behind Headlines, and thank you so much for coming in today to do the programme.
Yeah, good to be back with you, Simon. Yeah.
And share with us a little bit about your thoughts about what's been in the news, particularly last week, that President Macron is saying that he wants to recognise a Palestinian state. He'll be the first one within the UN Security Council to do so. He expects that Britain will follow the lead, plus there's growing pressure now being placed on the Foreign Office and the British government by prominent Labour MPs who want our nation to follow France's disastrous line in recognising a Palestinian state.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's not a case of France being the first to do so. It's just France would be, if they go ahead with it, would be the first on this UN Security Council, because there's over 130 nations out of the 190 odd in the UN have already so-called, recognized the so-called state of Palestine. But I suppose because it's the UN Security Council and you've got these major nations who've been there post-World War II, Macron has set a precedent, or he's in the process of setting a precedent. But, looking at some of the feedback and the pushback there has been on that, it seems that yet again he's diplomatically grandstanding. He's trying to draw attention to himself and France at a time when France's reputation, when France's authority in the world is just, well, it's not non-existence, but it doesn't count anymore. Who considers what France thinks anymore about any major topic? And so he's trying to reinsert himself onto the world stage yet again, as he did with Ukraine and the whole hoo-ha of, creating a European army to help the Ukrainians out and all the rest of it, in order to, I think, just try and put himself back onto the world stage when people are basically ignoring him and the country he represents.
No, absolutely. And of course, there is a danger in recognising a Palestinian state from a biblical perspective. So for this programme, we always have a scripture now. So the scripture for this programme, for behold, in those days and at that time, when I bring back the captives of Judea and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations and bring them down into the Valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there on account of my people, my brethren Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations. They also divided up my land. Now, for anyone or any government should take Joel chapter 3 verses 1 and 2 very, very seriously, because this talks about God's divine judgment for those nations that have scattered his people and divided his land. And that's exactly what a Palestinian state will do.
Yes. I mean, this is a scripture that we're already seeing a partial fulfillment of this, in that God has been in the process of restoring the Jewish people back to his land, back to their land since the 1800s. And of course, there was the massive influx after World War II and the Shoah, the Holocaust. So I think there is a longer term element to this, but there's also the short term, and you can't divorce one from the other. So God, through Joel, is issuing a warning to the nations. How you treat my people, how you treat my land, what you do to divide it and scatter them, there will be divine retribution. There isn't any other word for it. God will judge. It's the Valley of Jehoshaphat. It's the valley of God's judgment. So he's going to draw the nations at some point into one final catastrophic judgment against them for the way that they've treated the Jewish people, for the way they treated the land of Israel. That's, it's maybe some distance in the future, but we're also seeing a more localized or contemporary outworking of that just in some of the stuff that is going on, particularly in the Western nations, who have, most recently been in the forefront of all of this Jew hatred that is rife, throughout this country, throughout the States, and many other European nations as well. And God is dealing with those nations. We may not recognize it as severe judgment, but there's judgment going on nevertheless. And I think one of the key thing to understand about the judgment of God, I think oftentimes when teachers, when preachers, when speakers talk about God's judgment, we have in our heads this idea of God sovereignly doing something into a situation in order to impose a judgment. But actually, if you trace God's judgment throughout the scriptures, particularly in the Hebrew prophets, it's very often him withdrawing his hand of protection over nations, over peoples, and allowing them actually to go along the direction that the bulk of the people want to go. That too is God's judgment. And personally, I don't know about you, I see that working out sadly in our society, in our nation today.
Yeah.
It's not that God is imposing anything on us. He's actually pulling back and saying, okay, this is the direction you want to go with it. Yeah, you're going to pay the price for it.
Absolutely, certainly handing our nation over to its own sins and its own lusts and everything else, which then causes a kind of spiritual desert within the church in this country. But we've also seen, of course, the fulfillment of Genesis 12, verses 1 and 4, that I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you, referring to Israel. Then I think with looking at Bill Koenig's excellent book, Eye to Eye, and having done so many programs with you as well over the years, there is a direct, almost judgment when a nation decides to attack Israel, when a nation decides to ridicule Israel or the Jewish people, then there was we have an ecological disaster on our hands, or a financial crash, or something related to that. Now, the fact is that Macron is certainly heading for a collision course with the God of Israel, when he then wants to declare a Palestinian state and encourage other nations, including this nation, to do it. So it would mean that God's hand of protection, yes, would be lifted, but we also could see some very severe weather climate, or we could see a financial crash, or we could see a natural disaster, we could see a massive act of terrorism as a direct consequence and a result. And that's why I think, sadly, our secular leaders today, whether it's the British government, whether it's President Macron, whether it's the European Union, do not recognise foreign policy in light of God's word. And if they did, we'd have a much better foreign policy, and we'd certainly have a policy that would honour the Lord and honour Israel and the God of Israel.
Yeah, I mean, our parliaments, it's not just Westminster, though that's responsible, for most of the UK, but it's our parliaments. I would even go so far to say probably the Northern Ireland Parliament, the way it's gone over the last year or so, falls into this category too. God is not in the equation. That doesn't mean that there aren't believing MPs or members of the local assembly involved in those parliaments, but they have little influence. They cannot influence policy, and some of them, for whatever reasons, decide not to say anything in some situations. So I totally agree with you. We face the situation where God may have been withdrawing, but he may also impose. He may bring in, as you say, major catastrophic events into the life of the nation. I mean, the difficulty is sometimes, I think, as believers, we get it into our heads that God's punishing or chastising or disciplining for the sake of it. That's never the case. It's always to bring his people to repentance.
Absolutely.
But if the church of, the body of Jesus in this nation is not on board with what God is about, with what God is doing, they're the starting point. And if they don't get it right, if they're not in tune with the Lord, then what hope is there for the rest of the nation?
Absolutely. So let's have a kind of overview of this planned by President Macron of France to recognise a Palestinian state in June. And this will be co-sponsored by the Saudis at a UN conference in New York. Also, the Guardian has reported last week that the British Foreign Office and the government is under real increasing pressure from prominent Labour MPs to recognise a Palestinian state. And this would effectively mean that Britain and France would be rewarding Hamas for the mass genocide against Israel and the Jewish people committed on October the 7th, 2023, would send a wrong message to the Palestinian Authority that they don't need to negotiate and they can work for the destruction of the modern state of Israel and get everything they want. Also, we see that a unilateral Palestinian state is actually against international law and goes against the very foundations of the Oslo Accords that were signed by the Israeli government and the PLO back in 1993 that led to the establishment of the Palestinian Authority. And also we see that, for example, that a Palestinian state would pose as a massive security problem for Israel up on the Golan Heights. And the big question is, if Israel has a Palestinian state forced upon it, and Mahmoud Abbas is the president, then how long can Fatah and the PLO last, knowing that Hamas is so popular in the Palestinian territories, and any elections there would result in Hamas winning the elections, which would go completely contrary to what the international community want. And the Guardian newspaper reported on Sunday the 13th of April under the following headline: Labour MPs push for Foreign Office to recognise Palestinian statehood. Emily Thornby calls for the UK to join France, as Emmanuel Macron says June UN conference must be a decisive moment. Says the Foreign Office is under pressure from prominent Labour MPs to recognise a Palestinian state if President Macron pushes ahead with plans to recognise a Palestinian state at an international conference set for June. France is co-chairing the conference at the UN in New York alongside Saudi Arabia, and Macron has said the conference must be a decisive moment. Emily Thornby, who chairs the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, says that time was coming for the UK to recognise Palestinian statehood, adding, "We need to do it with friends, we need to do it with the French. There are lots of other countries sitting back and waiting." She said that if the West did not act soon, there would be no Palestinian state left to recognise. So show us this pressure that is mounting now for this Labour government and the Foreign Office, coming from prominent Labour MPs like Emily Thornby, and I'm quite surprised she actually heads up the Foreign Affairs Select Committee as well, pushing for a kind of Palestinian state. Do you think this is coming from a lot of pressure with a growing Islamist influence within the Labour Party?
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth, Simon. That would be my response to the question and the comment. You know, we saw at the last election how many how many constituencies have a major issue with an Islamic percentage of the population who were bringing their viewpoint, their influence to bear on where the local candidates stood on certain issues, including Israel. And so it's not surprising that you have, yes, there's prominent members of the Labour Party, but it doesn't have to be prominent members of the Labour Party anymore. Because we've got, Islamic MPs, okay, there's a small number, but you've got members of Parliament who are part of the Labour Party who are dependent on a significant number of voters in their constituency to return them. And if they cross those voters, if they put them off, woe betide them come the next election. So I have to be careful now how we paint this. But we are in a very difficult situation here in the UK, where a minority population, people who are still a minority population, are having above their actual percentage influence on the voting in our Parliament when it comes to key issues, including some overseas issues like this, with questions like this one.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is the first time that Emily Thornby, that I'm aware of, has actually made any significant contribution to this Parliament. She was very prominent when she was in opposition, very loud, but it's the first time that I can recall over the last few months that anybody's even heard anything from her.
No, absolutely. And the other aspect of this one, also understand for the Muslim community, the issue of Gaza, the issue of the Palestinian cause is a unifying issue for the Ummah. And of course, with it is the pretext of Islamification. of this country as well. So they are using this in order to gain political power, to energize their support base, their voter base. And this also explains why in the last parliament, 5 MPs were elected on a pro-Gaza platform, even though really Gaza doesn't really have anything much to do with this country at all. Yes, there's a foreign policy influence there, but this doesn't directly affect the British electorate. But if you are a leading member of the Muslim community, then this is a huge cause that you want to rally behind.
And it begs the question, her statement, we need to do it with friends, we need to do it with the French. When did the UK ever take a lead from France, for goodness sake? That's waffle. It means nothing. But it helps build the case that she's trying to present. Oh, the French are doing it, so we've got to do it. Do we? It almost makes the point, has the UK become France's poodle, pardon the pun,
Well, it could do. They feel closer politically aligned to President Macron and France than they do Donald Trump in the White House. So I think those could be some of the factors involved in this. But what we have seen ever since Keir Starmer has become our Prime Minister is closer ties to France, and to the extent we can actually see this cooperation between our Foreign Secretary David Lammy and also his French counterpart visiting Israel, and also they term Judea and Samaria as the occupied Palestinian territory. So this is their version of events when they were in Israel recently. Take a look.
I'm here in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories with my French counterpart Minister Séjourné to urge for de-escalation and an end to the war in Gaza. We stand together on the UK and France's first joint foreign ministers visit in more than a decade, because this message is so vital. We promised we would reconnect Britain.
Nous sommes pleinement mobilisés avec nos alliés et nos partenaires dans la région pour arrêter cette spirale de violence.
It's not only in the interests of civilians bearing the brunt of the horror and the suffering, as we have heard today when visiting the Red Crescent Aid Warehouse.
Ce n'est pas non plus dans l'intérêt de la région qui est au bord d'une guerre totale, avec la reprise des pourparlers sur le cessez-le-feu. Cette semaine, nous devons nous concentrer sur la possibilité d'une paix, d'une libération inconditionnelle de tous les otages et d'un cessez-le-feu immédiat et durable.
This conflict needs to end. Together, the United Kingdom and France will keep on doing the hard diplomatic work we need to open a path to long-term peace.
So that was courtesy of the British and Foreign and Commonwealth Office. I have to underline, I do not advocate in any way their statement that this is referred to as the Palestinian occupied territories. They only have to look at the Bible, they only have to look at international law, they only have to look at history to know that this is the biblical heartland of Israel, Judea and Samaria. And of course it's in the Bible, and where do the Jews come from? They come from Judea. So this is exactly the territory that our Foreign Secretary is talking about. Share with us as well that it's not only Emily Thornby who's also got in on this debate supporting the calls for a unilateral Palestinian state recognition by our government.
Yeah, there's a guy called Chris Doyle who's the chair of the Council on Arab-British Understanding, CABU. They always have to find capital letters for these things these days. Anyway, he also has backed this measure, saying it should have been done long ago. I mean, there have been people in the British government saying that for donkeys, okay, that's nothing new. And that such a step by 2 permanent members of the UN Security Council would send a powerful message. You bet it would send a powerful message. It sends a powerful message to all the terrorists, we can win. We don't have to negotiate. We don't have to give in. We just have to do what Hamas did on October the 7th over and over again, and we will win. Anyway, he also said that if the UK did not take this step soon, it would be too late, since Israel was clearly intent on pressing ahead with the effective annexation of what he called the West Bank, the disputed territories, otherwise known biblically as Judea and Samaria. CABU has a strong following among Labour's MPs. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Many of whom are furious with Israel's behaviour in Gaza. there is also anger that 2 Labour MPs were banned by Israel from visiting Judea and Samaria last week. Yeah,
I'm very pleased that they did get back.
Yeah, exactly.
That was a previous programme on Politics Today. But I mean, firstly, I think we have to understand that Israel has no intentions of going in to take over Jenin or take over Ramallah or take over Bethlehem because the Palestinian Authority is well and truly bedded to those towns. So certainly one areas that Israel is keen on is maintaining that strategic advantage which are known as the Judean Hills and Samaria, where there are very big Jewish settlements. But when we're talking about the Bible, this is the whole biblical history. This is the Jewish heritage, not Tel Aviv or Haifa or Netanya, or Ashkelon, but Israel's spiritual and biblical heritage lies in the mountains of Israel, Judea and Samaria. Of course, having visited the remarkable Shiloh and seeing where the Ark of the Covenant rested was absolutely extraordinary. And I can say that area is only second to Jerusalem in God's eyes. You know why there is such a battle for this land and this territory. But also it's very sad as well that our governments do not look into history. They don't recognise the fact that there has always been a Jewish presence. This is where is the foundation of our Judeo-Christian heritage, not Islam. And so therefore we surrender this to the Palestinians, we surrender this to Islam, then also means that the West is under threat, because without our Judeo-Christian heritage, we've got nothing to defend ourselves from Islamic extremism. But the Guardian article has given us the position of the British Foreign Office. So the British Foreign Office formal position, according to the Guardian, is to say that it will recognise a Palestine at an appropriate moment of maximum impact. But when David Cameron was Foreign Secretary, he marginally advanced the UK policy by affirming that recognition need not come to an end of a process that leads to a two-state solution in reference to Israel. He said that no state could have a veto over the UK's decision to recognise Palestine. But of course what this does, it takes the whole argument and discussions out of the hands of the Israelis and the Palestinians. This is the legal framework under international law in which to negotiate the end of this conflict. Now, it's not Israel's fault that the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and others are not interested in peace. They want to perpetuate this conflict. They don't believe that Israel has a right to exist. And so therefore, by gaining land and territory like a Trojan horse, they feel that once they're in a stronger position, then they can destroy Israel. So there is no two-state solution in this one, because the Palestinian Authority and that of Hamas want a one-state solution, and that's a Palestinian state over all of Israel. Currently side. So all these kind of pressurizing Israel to make concessions for a Palestinian state when the Palestinian leadership themselves are not ready to actually govern effectively and in the interests of their own people means that it would be absolutely irresponsible on behalf of the international community to recognize a Palestinian state.
Yeah, I mean, the two-state solution is a zombie that Macron now is trying to resurrect, and the British government is coming in behind him. The Saudi Arabians are obviously involved because they're co-sponsors with this supposed conference in early June. But it's dead. I mean, it's dead as far as the majority of the Israeli public is concerned. They have indicated, no, we're not interested. That's one of the things that has come out of October the 7th. Many people in the Israeli population have woken up to the reality that the Palestinian Arabs don't want peace, period. And the problem is that Western diplomats, Western politicians, like Mr. Macron, like Keir Starmer, just don't get it. And they're trying to push something that is absolutely dead in the water. I mean, the Israeli government have voted to say it's not going to happen. I mean, that's a major shift for an Israeli government to get to the point of taking that vote and it coming out as a majority. You know, a few weeks ago, the two-state solution is not an answer to the problem. And the Oslo Accords are no better. I mean, they shouldn't even be mentioned. They're so long dead and should be buried. So the whole thing is, as you rightly say, is an attempt by us, the French, and Uncle Tom Cobley and all, to impose what we think Israel should do in the situation. It's none of our business. It's Israel's business to sort it out with the Palestinian Arabs and to work it out whatever way they think best.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting, Simon, that actually several polls in Israel over the last couple of months have shown at least 60 to 70% of the Israeli population, the Jewish population, want annexation of Judea and Samaria. And that's a major shift as well in Israeli public opinion. You've got politicians along the sort of centre and centre-right, and obviously out to the right in Israeli politics, who are openly voicing this as well. I don't know when it's going to happen, but there has been a shift post-October 7th, 2023 on this issue as well as many others. And again, our politicians and diplomats are denying this. They're not recognising it when they come out and pontificate along these lines.
Absolutely. But I do want to pick up something you said. I don't believe in the Oslo Accords. I think they were a kind of sham from the very start when Yitzhak Rabin signed that historic peace treaty with Yasser Arafat, the arch enemy of Israel, chairman of the PLO, responsible for the blood of thousands of Israelis on his hands. And to think that he would be able to keep the likes of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in control, and that the Israeli government could cooperate and work with this new Palestinian entity in the biblical heartland of Israel, which is Judea and Samaria. But what the Oslo Accords do provide a kind of legal framework under international law that was signed by the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority with the sponsorship of the United States, the EU, the Quartet, as well as Russia and the EU. And so therefore, if there is a way forward, a legal way forward, then it comes through this process. There is no other process that it comes through because without side, this is actually in breach of international law, what the British and French government are proposing, because you can't suddenly just create a state out of nothing when effectively there is no state, and there now has been a Palestinian state, contrary to all the lies we hear as well. But it's also interesting how the Saudis are involved in this. So The Guardian goes on to say that the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who has personally accused Israel of genocide against the Palestinians, has said that Saudi Arabia will only recognise Israel as part of a pact that includes an irreversible path to a Palestinian state. They weren't saying that prior to October the 7th. Says, although there is scepticism in some British quarters as how far Macron is prepared to antagonise Israel, personal and political relations between Keir Starmer and Macron are strong, and it would be hard for the Foreign Office to resist a strong French push for Palestinian recognition, especially if it's seen as part of a European Gulf peace initiative.
It will not be hard, because our Foreign and Commonwealth guys, they'll be salivating at the thought of us at long last recognising a Palestinian state, because our Foreign and Commonwealth Office has a virus in it of Arabists who hate Israel, who hate the Jewish people, and they're longing for this very thing to happen. So they'll be tripping over themselves to get in behind this and support it. I'm not a betting man, but I would bet anything that that's the case.
The article goes on to say that in May of last year, France chose not to join Spain and Ireland and Norway in recognising a Palestinian state, following an overwhelming vote in favour by the UN General Assembly. Goes on to say that at present 148 of the 193 member countries of the UN have officially recognised Palestinian statehood. So far, no Western G20 country, including Canada, Italy or Germany, has taken that step. So let's remind ourselves of what happened back in May of 2024 when Ireland recognised a Palestinian state.
Today, Ireland, Spain, and Norway announced they will recognize a state of Palestine.
Each of us will now undertake whatever national steps are necessary to give effect to that decision. In the lead up to today's announcement, I've spoken with a number of other leaders and counterparts, and I'm confident that further countries will join us in taking this important step in the coming weeks.
Hamas called the decision an important step, while Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz said it is giving a prize to Hamas and Iran. And he recalled Israel's ambassadors to Norway and Ireland. The European countries' announcements came after this week's decision by the International Criminal Court to consider arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. On Tuesday, Norway declared if warrants are issued, they will enforce them and arrest Netanyahu and Gallant. On Capitol Hill, a bipartisan group of U.S. senators say they'll take action against the ICC. And the House of Representatives is working on a bill to sanction the court. Netanyahu warned that other democracies will be affected and told ABC the ICC prosecutor is pouring gasoline on the global fires of anti-Semitism.
Because he is attacking the one and only Jewish state and trying to handcuff us, preventing us from exercising responsibly through the laws of war as we obey them and we are subordinate to them. He's saying we're not. He's creating false symmetry, false facts, and he's doing a grave injustice to the International Court.
And that was thanks to our friends at CBN. That news report was from May of 2024, and there's a strong correlation between recognising a Palestinian state, as Ireland, Spain and Finland did back then, and also pushing for the International Criminal Court to bring legal proceedings against the Israeli Prime Minister and former Defence Minister Gallant, which is unprecedented. Knowing that Israel defended herself after the October the 7th, it should be the Palestinian Authority and Hamas in the dock, not Israel, which is extraordinary, isn't it? When we only, like last week, marked the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, the notorious Nazi concentration camp in the heart of Germany that the SAS found and also the British found evidence of the appalling atrocities carried out by the Nazis during the Holocaust. And this was a real genocide. October was the real genocide, but it's like the International Court want to put Israel on trial for defending herself.
Yeah, and the more that we discover about that, the more we find that, you know, Iran is sponsoring nations who are part of this case. So yet again, Iran has its tentacles into situations where it's using international lawfare to try and harass Israel and the Jewish people.
Yeah. And this is also the big part of a push for a Palestinian state, because if the international community vote and recognise a Palestinian state, then if that Palestinian state attacks Israel, like we saw on October the 7th, this time from Gaza and Hamas, and Israel responds, then it's Israel in the dock, and it just then means that Israel finds it very difficult for her to defend herself, because effectively the nations are working for her destruction. Now, the Telegraph last week, back on the 10th of April, wrote an excellent article under this headline. Macron accused of giving Hamas a prize for terrorism. They say that Israel criticises the French president as Paris indicates it would become the first member of the UN Security Council to recognise a Palestinian state. Israel accuses Emmanuel Macron of giving Hamas a prize for terrorism after he said that France was ready to formally recognise Palestine as a state. In a major foreign policy shift, the French president said that Paris could recognise a Palestinian state as early as June at a UN conference in New York. If this took place, France would become the first permanent member of the UN Security Council to do so, potentially creating a rift with Israel's ally, US President Donald Trump. Goes on to say that during a two-day trip to Egypt, Mr. Macron said recognition would encourage several countries in the Middle East that do not recognise Israel to do so. And this is what Macron said. He said, we need to move towards recognition. And so over the next few months, we will, I'm not doing it to please anyone, I'll do it because at some point it will be right. He also said that, and because I also want to take part in a collective dynamic that should also enable those who defend Palestine to recognise Israel in turn, something that many of them are not doing. So how, by recognising a Palestinian state, will this force other nations who currently don't recognise Israel as a legitimate state, such as the Saudis, such as the Iranians, then come into a fold and recognise Israel because the UN and because France and Britain has then recognised the Palestinian state?
I don't know, Simon. I honestly don't know. I think this man is deluded. Honestly think he's deluded if he thinks that by merely going through the motions in the French Parliament of recognising a state of Palestine, that all of a sudden the Arab nations who refuse to recognise Israel are going to be tripping over themselves to do so. There is no logic to that idea, to that statement on the part of President Macron at all. Yes, it will be significant if one member of the Security Council in the UN recognises when nobody has out of that group. Okay, it will be significant. And if we, as a French poodle, follow in behind and do it, that's 2 members out of the 5 permanent members. Okay. They're probably, you probably got Russia and China who will be quite happy to fall in behind those. So that would leave the United States isolated.
Well, possibly the Italian government is very pro-Israel, so I don't think they would go along with it.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the 5 permanent members, okay? So it would be diplomatically, on an international political level, it would be a major decision. But it's still the UN, which is just a talking shop, you know, blasting hot air out into the atmosphere over New York as they talk and talk and talk and talk and rarely do anything useful or concrete that benefits the rest of human society. Yeah, it swings and roundabouts. People will take note. Sure, Israel will look as if it's even more isolated than it already is. But then you've got scriptures that actually point to the fact that God has set aside Israel and the Jewish people to be a nation standing alone. And that's part of Israel's problem in these days. They want to be like the other nations. And that's what God has not destined them for. So we have to be aware of the fact that maybe in all of these machinations that are going on, God is working out that purpose too. I don't say that in a fatalistic sense. I say it in a reality sense that maybe this is what God is using all of this to push Israel further and further to that place where it is only dependent on him and not on any other nation or anybody.
Absolutely, because we know after the horrors of October the 7th, the Israelis could no longer be dependent upon their government, nor that of the IDF. So where does that leave the Israelis? That leaves them to rely upon their God, the God of Israel, as their protector and their defender. Now let's have a look at Israel's response to the fact that Macron is pushing to recognise a Palestinian state together with Saudi Arabia in June of this year. So Gideon Saar, who's Israel's foreign minister, posted on X, it says, a unilateral recognition of a functional Palestinian state by any country in the reality that we all know would be a prize for terror and a boost for Hamas. These kinds of actors will not bring peace, security and stability in our region closer, but the opposite. They will only push them further away. The Israeli Prime Minister responded on Sunday after his own son criticised the French president, saying Macron was gravely mistaken in advocating for a Palestinian state. He added, President Macron is gravely mistaken in continuing to promote the idea of a Palestinian state in the heart of our land, a state whose sole aspiration is the destruction of Israel. And let's have a look at 2 CBN News reports from last year when President Biden was occupying the White House, when the US administration were putting Israel under a lot of pressure to recognize a Palestinian state, and why Israel said no.
After a call with President Biden, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu again rejected the idea of recognizing a Palestinian state. Posting on X, formerly known as Twitter, he summed up his opposition in 2 sentences. Israel categorically rejects international dictates regarding a permanent settlement with the Palestinians. Such an arrangement will be reached only through direct negotiations between the parties without preconditions. Israel will continue to oppose the unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. Such recognition in the wake of the October 7th massacre would give a huge reward to unprecedented terrorism and prevent any future peace settlement. The plan would include many steps rejected by Israel in the past, including evacuating many communities in the biblical lands of Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank, along with a Palestinian capital in eastern Jerusalem, and a combined government for the West Bank and Gaza. Israeli government spokesman Avi Hyman said, "It's not time to speak about the day after the war ends."
Now is not the time to be speaking about gifts for the Palestinian people at a time when the Palestinian Authority themselves have yet to even condemn the October 7th massacre. Now is the time for victory, total victory against Hamas. All discussions of the day after Hamas will be had the day after Hamas.
And today in southern Israel, a terrorist attack at a bus station, a shooter killing 2 and wounding 4 others before being stopped. Meanwhile, Israel criticized a United Nations official who told Sky News that despite its acts of terror, Hamas is not a terror organization, which is a position held by the UN.
I think it's very difficult. And as you say, I've worked with many different terrorist and insurgent groups. Hamas is not a terrorist group for us, of course, as you know, it's a political movement.
Posting on X, Israel's UN ambassador Gilad Erdan blasted Griffiths, saying, "You are no humanitarian. Sadly, you are a terror collaborator." Also, Netanyahu and other senior Israeli officials met with CIA Director William Burns in Tel Aviv to discuss talks for the release of the hostages. The Prime Minister earlier refused to send a delegation to Cairo for talks on Thursday until Hamas lessened its demands. Families of the hostages chained themselves together at the entrance to the Defense Ministry, calling for the War Cabinet to send a delegation to Cairo. And in Gaza, IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari explained Israel's military mission in the Nasser hospital in Gaza, where Israeli intelligence believed bodies and hostages were being held.
According to the information we have collected, I can now share some of the terrorists who took part in the massacre of October 7th. They were found by our forces inside the Nasser hospital complex. If it weren't for Hamas starting this war, taking our hostages and hiding in the hospital, we wouldn't need to be in the hospital in the first place. Hamas started this war. Israel will end this war.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks to our friends at CBN for that informative news report, and very good in kind of condemning the UN's representative who didn't believe that Hamas are a terrorist organisation, when, if in their covenant charter calls for the destruction of the Jewish people worldwide and the destruction of Israel, carried out the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history, massacred over 1,200 Israelis and foreign nationals, took 251 hostages to the hellhole that was Gaza, injured between 6,000 and 7,000, and the economic cost of that attack on Israel, having to call up its reservists and then to destroy Hamas in Gaza. I don't think you can call Hamas a political entity. Would you call the Nazis a political entity who share a very similar demonic and evil ideology? I think they would say that the Third Reich was not a political entity. It was an authoritarian, totalitarian, evil regime. And that's exactly what Hamas are. There was a very good article, Robin, published by our good friends at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. And this is Dr. Dan Dicker, together with Khalid Abu Tomar, writing this article entitled "Why a Palestinian State Today Will Endanger Israel and the Middle East." So this was written last year. They say discussions on recognising or creating a Palestinian state in the aftermath of Hamas's October the 7th, 2023 attack on Israel convey to the Palestinians that terrorism is profitable and that can lead to the realisation of their goals. It says that Hamas has taken credit for the recent decision back in May of 2024 by Ireland, Norway and Spain to recognise a Palestinian state along the pre-1967 lines. Hamas officials see the decision by the three European countries and as a result of the October the 7th massacre, which they claim thrust the Palestinian issue back into the forefront of international affairs.
Yeah. I mean, it's logical. It makes total sense. They see this as a win-win situation. Their cause has been put back into the limelight again, and it's boosted right up into the faces of everybody in the westernized world, as we've seen from the responses at universities and out on the streets of London, Manchester, and all major cities in the UK, demonstrating on behalf of these terrorists, on behalf of these murderers and rapists. And it beggars belief yet again that anybody can think that entering into any sort of negotiation with these monsters is going to bear any useful fruit at all in the long term. It's a nonsense. But it's this furrow that our diplomats and our politicians are determined to plough all over again, despite the facts on the ground. So yeah, it's crazy, Simon.
Absolutely. So this article also gives some very major points as to why a Palestinian state is dangerous. Firstly, the article points out that any prospective Palestinian state will most likely be controlled by Hamas. Public opinion polls conducted both prior to and following the October the 7th massacre indicate that the majority of Palestinians prefer Hamas over the Fatah-led Palestinian Authority. The polls also show that a majority of Palestinians support the armed struggle against Israel, reflecting support for Hamas jihad on October the 7th and beyond.
Can I just come in there on something? Somebody, I think, in Israel quite rightly pointed out, we have seen these demonstrations against Hamas in the Gaza Strip over the last, 2-3 weeks? Yep. Major demonstrations. We've seen Hamas brutally try to curtail them. Some awful things done to, Palestinian Arabs in Gaza. But as somebody rightly pointed out, if these people really want this conflict to finish, if they really want to get rid of Hamas, one of the things they could quite easily do is bring out the hostages and hand them over to Israel. Are they? You bet you they are not. And polling and personal, video interviews have proven over and over and over again that the vast majority of the Gazan population, despite the fact that Hamas is making life hell for them too, hate Israel even more, hate the Jewish people even more. And they're right behind what Hamas did on October the 7th. So it is a complete fiction for anybody to say that there's a significant size of the population in Gaza that doesn't like what happened on October the 7th. It's a nonsense. It's a lie. And that needs to be borne in mind by everybody who's looking at this situation, that the bulk of the Gazan population are right behind Hamas in that sense.
Yep. And that's to do with the education within the Palestinian Authority. That's the fact that Hamas did have total totalitarian control over its population in Gaza. The Islamization, we even heard about weddings, for example. Hamas terrorists would shoot up to a wedding and shoot the bridegroom and the groom dead and the partygoers dead because they didn't like music, or they would attack a Christian bookshop. Anyone who didn't kind of follow their line, just absolutely eliminated, and the world stood silent.
Yes.
So, but of course, those brave residents of Gaza who stood up to Hamas realized that the misery that's been inflicted on them was not done by Israel, but was ultimately done by Hamas. If Hamas had not invaded on October the 7th, the IDF would be not there and the devastation would not be done because Israel has to protect herself. The other point they make in this article is point 2, regarding dangers of a Palestinian state, that a state would serve as a springboard for additional acts of terrorism against Israel. Until October the 6th, the Hamas-led ruled Gaza Strip was essentially a separate sovereign state. After taking control of it in 2007 with a coup, Hamas exploited the coastal enclave to produce rockets and mortars, build the world's largest network of terror tunnels and smuggle weapons in from Egypt. The Hamas terrorists also attacked Israel and crossed an internationally recognized border, the Gaza Strip. Israel withdrew from the entire Gaza Strip in 2005. The Israeli communities that were attacked near the border with the Gaza Strip were not illegal settlements. Some were established in the 1940s and 1950s. So again, talking about how, for example, that a Palestinian state and the great danger that if there is a recognition of a state, it will be a Hamas state. Yes. It will be a Palestinian Islamist state. And of course, its one goal and one aim will be to destroy Israel. Yeah. So what we've seen in Gaza over the last couple of decades will be magnified in Judea and Samaria.
Yeah, and thirdly, the assumption that a demilitarized Palestinian state would not pose security threats to Israel has been proven untrue. I mean, October the 7th was the prime example. Palestinians are capable of killing a large number of Israelis using relatively light weapons, such as rocket-propelled grenades, handguns, gliders, hatchets, AK-47s, and incendiary bombs. And additionally, no Palestinian leader would be able to stop the smuggling of weapons and the formation of armed militias in a Palestinian state. And that's going on. It's going on in Judea and Samaria, in the areas that the Palestinian Authority control. If it wasn't for the Israeli security services, the Palestinian Authority would have been obliterated long ago. It's Israel that keeps the Palestinian Authority in place and prevents Hamas from destroying it and taking over, Judea and Samaria.
Absolutely. And the other aspect of this one as well, if you create a Palestinian state and become a militarized state, they open up to elections. Hamas are going to win those elections. And then Jordan becomes destabilized because 70 to 80% of the population in Jordan is Palestinian. And so therefore the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, which is a kind of Arab progressive nation, will feel the full force of Hamas on its borders, which then could lead to a revolution and the collapse of the Hashemites and Hamas taking over Jordan. And, therefore we see then this becomes a massive threat, not only to Israel, but a whole destabilization of the Middle East, because essentially what the West is doing is empowering extremists, empowering Islamic terrorists to take over, like we've seen that's happened in Syria recently with the downfall of President Assad's regime. We have an Islamist regime in power there. We'd have an Islamist regime in power in Oman, an Islamist in Ramallah as well. And that's not good for Israel, and that's not good for the West. So again, where is the West promoting the kind of moderates, those who believe in freedom of speech, those who believe in academic institutions, democratic institutions, a free judiciary, a free press? All of these things are no conditions. And also, the Palestinian Authority haven't come to a place where they've had to come up and realize that their ultimate goal, the destruction of Israel, cannot feasibly happen. And that's why I think Trump's Abraham Accords worked so well, because it took out the Palestinian equation, that the Arab states could make peace with Israel without going through the Palestinian Authority first, completely bypass them. And so this is where we saw, for example, the Gulf states make a peace with Israel. And if it wasn't for October the 7th, then Israel would also be heading for a normalization agreement with the Saudis.
And yet, despite all of that, President Macron wants to pull in the Palestinian Authority. He claims it's possible for the Palestinian Authority to be reformed. I mean, this is a Palestinian Authority that's headed by a president who is in, the 20th year of his 4-year term, who, despite the fact that pressure has been applied to him to stop the pay for slave payments to terrorists and their families, has said, even if we're down to the last cent, we will still pay these, and has actually circumvented the restrictions put upon the Palestinian Authority and is now still paying those stipends out of another fund that it funnels money into. I mean, again, it is beyond, it beggars belief that any Western diplomat can honestly believe that Mahmoud Abbas and the thieves that he works with in the Palestinian Authority, who've stolen billions from the international community, can be trusted with anything.
Absolutely. I mean, more money is being pumped into the Palestinian Authority than the Marshall Aid Plan was pumped into Europe to rebuild Europe after the Second World War. So it just shows you that this is just throwing absolute money at a cause that is just nothing but a money pit and a geostrategic hotspot. But give us a kind of the biblical perspective as why, as Christians, biblically we should be opposed to a Palestinian state, because this is where we get authority from, the Word of God. Okay, so we had the scripture from Joel at the beginning of our time doing this recording together, but we need to actually take a step all the way back to Genesis. You mentioned Genesis 12 verses 1 to 3. We also need to mention Genesis 12, 6 and 7, where God promises to give Abram all the land of Canaan. He reiterates that promise as part of an unconditional covenant that he himself swears he will keep to. Abram's not even involved in the creating of the covenant, apart from killing the animals, in Genesis 15, 18 to 21. And he reiterates it again a third time to Abraham in Genesis 17 verses 7 and 8. And then he speaks it to Isaac in Genesis 26. And then he speaks it to Jacob in Genesis 28 and Genesis 35. God makes it clear to Abraham and his immediate descendants that he has sovereignly deeded the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their seed. That's the basis. Anybody who argues over this issue is arguing with what God has said. And if you want to do that, all the best of luck to you. Yep, that's a good warning to President Macron and Keir Starmer. So we've done a great job. Thank you so much, Robin. It's gone very quickly, and thank you for helping me unpack the dangers of a Palestinian state from a biblical perspective. And I just want to thank you for watching this program at home. It's not because we don't believe that the Palestinians should have their own state. They've already got one. It's called Jordan. But we also have to understand that biblically this goes against God, and that we could see that our Prime Minister Keir Starmer, together with French President Macron, are on a very dangerous course by recognising a unilateral Palestinian state, because effectively this will bring judgment not only upon France but also on Britain, because ultimately it's up to us as a nation to bless Israel and the Jewish people. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Behind the Headlines.